Hello, hi, this is David King. Today we're going to discuss marriage and how it disagrees with how the government considers what they term as marriage anyway. But it's very interesting. This part one and two. I've got four parts in just this one paper. I got another paper on marriage too. But do you know what marriage is? That's the big question. To understand why it's wrong, you have to understand all the reasons. You have to understand what marriage is, and that's really difficult today um, to understand because what's been written. They rely upon many things, historical things. So let's get going, and let's look at the biblical history as we go along too, and also the Word of God as far as what marriage is. Malachi chapter 2, verse 14 reads, between believers marrying, because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, the wife of thy covenant. Promises mean something to God, as he is a witness, as David experiences with Jonathan, and so on. You can read the Bible verses to go along. Marriage between the Israelites was and is to be for Christians today a covenant to which the Lord was and is witness via betrothal. Thus, marriages can be seen as a covenant, as God being a witness. But under no circumstance can be thought of conditional legal contracts based upon one party having to provide a certain amount of financial support, as the law of Hammurabi demanded, and other societies maybe. But it was true that God's marriage to Israel at Mount Sinai, Israel, the bride, agreed to obey God. Exodus chapter 19. In return, God agreed to honor them above all people. But there were no government-issued legal marriage documents signed by both parties, and not even signed by Moses as his representative after Moses wrote them on the second tablet. And regarding divorce, a simple bill of divorcement with the words, "She is not my wife, nor am I her husband," was written up without any lawyers involved or government agencies at that time. All the man did was write these words, give them to the woman so she could remarry, letting the other person know that her previous marriage has been dissolved or released. And so you hear a lot about ancient Israel, how they practiced. We base it on the scriptures. I always want, just like in the head covering paper I wrote on video on YouTube, they always want you to go outside into the world. Okay, we're dealing with biblical history and biblical examples. We don't need to go into what ancient Israel, based upon their studies, has brought. Okay, that's a big thing here. We're basing this on it is written. Very few court or record-keeping agencies were involved in the 1800s either in America. And what reason is there for the government to be involved in these type of statistics anyway? A census is mandated every 10 years. This should be enough for a government to get an idea of what's going on in a nation. And the helping of any divorced woman or men must be done by individuals and families, not government agencies with stolen taxpayer money. But the state says that their adhesion contract is just a secular license, has nothing to do with religion. We disagree. For the government is automatically involved in religion when they violate the laws of nature, preventing people from marrying by requiring such a contract. And this adhesion contract with the state is socialist, which is another religious belief of government that also violates the laws of nature. There are a lot of socialist rights involved with government contractual arrangements today, but it is the role of a good government to help others. It is not the good role of a good government to help others. This is a jurisdiction of we the people, who do so willingly and not through force, for force is violence, and all violence needs to end in America. Plus, socialism is an ism. It's the same thing with capitalism. The religious beliefs, they would violate the laws of nature, and is government involvement in religion. Socialism is also theft. It is not a right, as they consider the 14th Amendment, but a form of slavery, and thus it is not the jurisdiction of a government to redistribute property rights. Inequality violates the laws of nature also, since no two atoms are equal. Thus it has nothing to do with equality, really, but money, power, and control. And giving is mandated by the laws of nature to be determined by we the people when we give willingly, not when a government steals and redistributes based upon religious beliefs which violate the unchanging laws of nature. Our elected officials are pondering to types of corporations to get elected today. And one of the reasons contractual marriage licenses were first sold to the public, not the real reason, was that sinful contractual unions, like a white marrying a black or later homosexuals marrying, will proliferate, which will then result in the breakdown of society. To protect you, they said. There are two reasons the Bible prohibits these illicit sexual relationships or marriages. These sexual relationships via marriage or unmarried intercourse are unnatural, for one thing, and they violate the laws of nature, as Leviticus chapter 2 depicts by using the Hebrew word tevel, uh, a, a term which is used of a woman having sex with a beast. John the Baptist levied these charges against incestuous marriages in Mark chapter 6, for John had said unto Herod, It is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. Leviticus 18 says, None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord. Flesh to the flesh. In other words, it means a blood relationship, and sexual intercourse is uncovering the nakedness of another. Genesis chapter 2 says that they become one flesh. In other words, illicit sexual intercourse or illicit marriage makes the other extended family relationships as close as husband and wife and are not natural, and is why King David just laid down with Abishag in his old age. He might have had sex, but we don't know. But she was considered his wife in 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2. And is why David understood Adonijah was after his throne by asking Abishag to be his wife. When common law ruled our law system, common law marriage placed the power back into the hands via we the people instead of through the courts or in government or even the clergy. The clergy began being involved in marriage in the 1500s. Clergy involvement in marriage through a ceremony was never heard of before this time. Roman Catholicism, with the beginning of the Reformation, were losing members, and this was one way to bring back the lost sheep back to the fold. Today, Roman Catholicism does not recognize marriage licenses, the worldly ones, as being valid. Today, it is being used by all denominations as an outreach program to do likewise through their ill-termed premarital counseling classes, when in fact they are already married through betrothal. But today, because of the paper money of the Federal Reserve bankers, even though you may enter into a common law marriage, I think 12 states still have it, the power to control your marriage is still with the state. Why? Because statutory law rules our courts and business transactions, and that came about with the advent of paper money, Federal Reserve. Common law courts cannot exist in a nation that has paper or worthless paper or money, paper. When the paper money came into being, the common law courts gradually disappeared to the point where they do not exist anymore, although they still deal with common law cases like theft and murder and so on. And so today, marriage is under the jurisdiction of the government, civil law, finding its birth based upon the ancient law of Hammurabi, and even that incorrectly. We'll deal a lot with law Hammurabi, so we'll go through these, and God willing, I'm able to do both papers I've written on marriage, but let's get going. Today, all state statutory marriages go beyond the law of Hammurabi, which even the most liberals cannot even stand to read. This law of Hammurabi. And statutory marriages are a form of involuntary servitude in that they are given socialist benefits, and Americans are forced to give to these licensed individuals through, for example, the child care income tax credit and a multitude of other ways. Our government calls socialist theft rights based upon how the modern courts have interpreted the 14th Amendment, but the courts ignore the 13th Amendment. It came before, which takes priority, being placed before. In the preamble of the Constitution, which mentions the laws of nature and of nature's God, both of which condemn slavery and involuntary servitude. All forms of socialism are just that, slavery, and they violate the laws of nature, property rights. Also, common law is the only law in our Constitution. Civil rights and gay marriages fall under unconstitutional slave statutory law. Statutory marriage today gives a couple the ability to steal from their neighbor through tax deductions, tax credits, etc. I'm not against all statutory laws, so to speak, but most of them are anything that violates the laws of nature. Like regular government marriages today, once homosexual marriages became legal, it gave them the right to do many things, one of which was joining with the theft of their neighbor's property rights with approximately 41 welfare benefits. Common law and common law marriages back 150 years ago would never allow this to happen. Thus, today, even though there are several states that recognize common law marriages, even divorce matters under common law are still governed by the statutes. So, yet our government tells us they are just done for secular or administrative purposes. Tell this to a husband who is forced to make communist child care payments if they divorce. And there is nothing secular in this world in the first place. Secular is an atheist, rebellious belief that makes no philosophical sense, but which Lutherans today hold on to when they state that the government and the church should have nothing to do with each other. And I'm a Lutheran too. And there is nothing wrong with the phrase separation of church and state if it is understood correctly, for the Constitution has no such phrase. It is as if our government hopes that the eyes of God have dimmed and that he does not see these sly written contractual agreements they have placed upon the American people. In a lot of the world, but nothing is, as far as I'm aware, as bad as in America. And there are nations that recognize common law, and they don't have all this other stuff packed in. It's called packing when the government throws a bunch of programs in on, for example, income tax or marriage licenses or even driver's licenses today. They're packing those too. The Lutheran church bodies violate that sacred belief of a separation of church and state many times, especially by submitting to the government requirements to incorporate, placing their churches under the rulership of a government corporation, throwing out Christ as the head of the congregation, and in effect worshiping the beast, Revelations 13. For a true church does not obey man-made rules of any sort other than abiding by the laws of nature as written by Christ and what is written in his word. This is because the church has only one boss, and this is Christ. As the Lutheran W. Peters writes in his The Judge is at the Door Revelation commentary, the government has its own duty to execute right and justice in the land. However, it should not concern itself with God's kingdom. There it has nothing to say, no right to rule, for there are only God's word rules, that they are enabled to live a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness. But today, whatever the state speaks, God must be silent. Whatever the state allows is no longer considered a sin. God himself seems to be silent, as though he no longer were in power. How true of modern Lutherans today. The Lutheran churches have largely submitted to the dictates of Hitler too during World War II, and can continue on the same course today. Today, the main key phrase for justifying licensed polygamous unions is for administrative purposes. But why is the government even involved in polygamous unions when they enter as a? It's beyond polygamy. It's not even polygamy. It's not even a person entering. It's a corporation. Okay, it's worse. I mean, for administrative purposes, if not to institute socialism is what they do down the road. They pack them with it, which is why they headed this way. At first claiming to protect us from black and white intermarrying, then illicit marriages that are too close blood-wise, for example. But we notice that throughout the 1800s, there was no reason for a marriage license. Neither should there be today. There certainly are a lot of tracking down deadbeat dads for administrative purposes. For how else could government agencies and courts pursue those broken hearts worldwide for communist child support payments if they're just for administrative purposes? Or how could they control how old your son has to be in order to marry? Are you aware that most countries don't even have a minimum age, or it's really not even looked at? Or how could they just be for administrative purposes when this license transfers ownership of your children over to the state and removes the husband and Christ as being the head of the family, practically forcing vaccination shots upon your child and making parents bring your children in for a checkup every year where they are required to take their clothes off in front of people they don't know, they've never met before? It's a form of sexual abuse, I believe. And pay for it if they determine you are too wealthy for administrative or secular purposes. And with over 1 million divorces a year in America, State-issued marriages and divorces are a $50 billion industry for the court system and other profiteers of misery. Divorce must now proceed through these greedy, unjust courts for administrative purposes. So why do liberals want to control everyone's womb, especially those of Christians, through unnecessary C-sections? Basically, happen all the time in America. You look at other nations, and like Finland, yeah, those are the places Christians need to go and to have children. I believe, because they do just a fraction of C-sections, which basically will destroy your ability to have children in the future. Basically, also having to give birth in a hospital, practically speaking. High taxation everywhere in America, statutory laws upon statutory laws, raising prices for everything, preaching condoms in our school systems, which is unnatural. Homosexuality, orgasms outside of marriage and not babies. And why has the birth rate dropped 50% for married couples since 1910, folks? Because the religious left does not want Christian women staying home and bearing children. Look at it in Exodus chapter 1. They're very sly. They want workers producing income tax money for their communist programs and corporate favors. And they realize when they control the wombs of Christian women, they control our beliefs. These are some reasons why they push for high taxes, socialism, equal rights, condoms, baby murdering clinics, and licensed unions, besides all the other statutory laws and regulations. But why is it that true Christianity must have the beliefs of others shoved down their throats? Christian marriages, common law marriages, should be legally acknowledged, legitimate also, not forbidden. They're forbidding to marry today in America, because these are not marriages that the state gives. In fact, civil unions, marriage, violate the common law of our Constitution. Common law marriage means agreement of the two parties and consent of the father of the bride was all that is necessary to be married, although the father of the groom biblically should consent also. The original common law, as conceived by our forefathers, has not been in charge of this nation's legal system for the past 90 years. Thus, modern common law marriages are essentially worthless because they are forced into a statutory courtroom anyhow. Modern common law marriages must divorce through the civil law court system. Just follow the money. So we kindly ask them, please end this slavery once and for all in America. After the law of Hammurabi and in more modern times, historically, the Church of England, still under the Roman Church, started the publishing of the ban in 1215, done to verify that the ones married were actually not married at the same time to someone else, for example, but the publishing of the ban was done only in church and only infrequently, yet still is in practice among many Catholic parishes. The publishing of the ban, according to some, was less costly than writing up a marriage license, and is maybe why marriage licenses did not begin until later. But Wikipedia points out that the names of the contracting parties would be announced publicly in the Roman Church during Mass by the parish priest of both parties on 3 consecutive holy days. The names were also read from the pulpit and put into the weekly bulletin for 3 consecutive weeks. At this time, though, some historians say that the first marriage license was issued earlier than 1215, but I find no such historical evidence backing that up, unless their opposition considers posting the ban to be a cheap version of a marriage license. And further, they go on to state that marriage licenses took firm root during the colonial period of America, but here again, no evidence at all suggesting such a belief. In fact, please read in Wikipedia timeline of civil marriages in the United States. Put that in and read it. There were no states requiring these type of business enterprise unions that we have today in the 1800s. There were none. In fact, if they did exist, the common law courts would have allowed the citizens complete exemption, and they would have been knocked down by the courts permanently anyway. We hear the same with divorce courts from our liberal friends. The opposition stating that they were also common in the 1800s. This too is false. Now, certainly, a divorced couple could go to divorce court if they so desired back then, or bring it to a court, I mean. But they were by no means forced to, as today. And the same with those who hold that paper money being printed was also common in the 1800s. This too is false. Paper money was printed one time by 1 or 2 states, to a few of them anyway, to help pay for the debt of the Northern-Southern War, and for a brief period, and never by a foreign corporation like the Federal Reserve or the federal government. And it was a rare bird for divorce to go through any government agency, if ever. And and uh, and when it did, it was probably through a church, as even Paul gives jurisdiction in somewhat similar fashion today. For a Christian church is in charge of many civil matters when both are members. They should be and that's illegal today. Okay, this is illegal as far as I know. The reason I discuss the history of marriage licenses is because, as mentioned, our opposition twists history to make it sound like that is the way it has always been. We, we disagree, but even if it was, Christians stick to the laws of nature and reply as Christ to Satan. It is written. Okay, and that's what they do when they bring up ancient history too in Israel based upon marriages. They always look at the ancient history of marriages, and they do the same thing. They try to draw you away from the Word of God, as in the head covering requirements for women today in 1 Corinthians 11, which I've written extensively on. They twist the laws of nature. Everything, there is no truth in the Bible. It all is influenced by evolution. Everything is evolving. The truth is evolving, and so they want your eyes going to ancient Israel. Okay, today when you read and you do a study on this and research online. So be aware of that. And so it was first in the Council of Trent, the mid-1500s, that marriage licenses were given birth and mandated, which came with the mandate that a priest perform the ceremony along with two witnesses. Today, this church body uses them to legally require that in a mixed faith marriage, both agree to bring them up in the Catholic faith, a legal document for outreach purposes, but again, denying the basic doctrine that marriage already began in betrothal. Obviously, both of the Roman Catholics were the first to mandate marriage licenses. But the state was not involved at this time. The worldly governments like America were starting to dream, though, of the opportunity for all kinds of socialism if the family unit could be put under the headship of the state. For their eyes were also starting to look at an income tax during the same period of time, saying that the rich were not paying their, quote, fair share. The possibilities seem endless to Congress. In fact, both the income tax and the federal involvement in marriages happened the same day the Federal Reserve came into existence in 1913. As Wikipedia states, the federal government formally recognizes marriage in law of the first time with the passage of the Revenue Act of 1913. So here we go. Both of them are being done right away, along with the corporations. Also, this very same day, corporations were unofficially invited to move their corporations across the ocean, as the new civil law courts would give them the opportunity to do many things, like create laws favoring their industries. And so all that happens the same day. They had this in mind right through the 1800s. They were talking about the income tax, and then they saw the marriage license. They saw it all coming together. Both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, it wasn't one. They saw a big money grab coming up here, and big possibilities. Our opposition says that in 1639 Massachusetts began requiring marriage license, but I fail to see anything about marriage license recorded in the statutes from 1639, except that in 1873 in Massachusetts it mentions we ordinarily extend recognition to out-of-state marriages under principles of comity, even if such marriages would be prohibited here unless the marriage violates Massachusetts public policy, including polygamy, consanguinity, and affinity. It's just a prohibition. It was based upon statutes in 1873, nothing about any license requirement. And even if there was, 1639 was before the American Revolutionary War anyway. Now, we agree with our opposition insofar as the government yearned for marriage licenses during this time, as they did an income tax. And so they brought them in gradually through anti-miscegenation laws only, and never for anyone. I think personally that they saw the war ending, that they were going to win it. Let's take away the rights and then bring them back a few years later. The great saviors, government is. Anti-miscegenation marriage laws became used later when a black married became used when a black married a white, starting in 1863 in the midst of the northern nation. So they started prohibiting these marriages during the war against the southern nation. Many believe that North Carolina in 1741 had anti-miscegenation marriage laws prohibiting marriages between black and white, once again before the American Revolutionary War, although such a license was nothing to be proud of, nor of offering validation for the government to then later on jump on the bandwagon with their business enterprise unions. But why continue slavery today with marriage licenses? It wasn't until paper money replaced gold and silver that marriage licenses became commonplace among all married couples in all states. In other words, after gold and silver, which ensured common law, was taken away, then unconstitutional statutory law replaced it, or civil law as we know it today. Thus, by 1923, the federal government had established the Uniform Marriage and Marriage License Act, prohibiting here they come, the saviors. Now they're going to prohibit them. Okay, this is many years after slavery, but California and Virginia were holdouts, exercising apparently their 10th Amendment rights, but got rid of these laws in 1948. California did, as the Supreme Court also ruled against the laws in 1967, twisting the arm of Virginia to pass the Racial Integrity Act, the RIA, allowing whites and blacks to be married with the state at the head in their business enterprise unions. By 1929, and the reason why I'm going through all this history is because it is so twisted, like I say, by the liberals, that they're always doing it through the 1800s, they're always printing money and so on and so forth. This is just another one, okay? By 1929, every state in the Union had unconstitutional marriage license laws based upon unconstitutional civil law, and at this time, Christian marriages became banned. California got rid of these black-white laws in 1948, and so, as I pointed out, but today, certain religious beliefs profess that marriage laws are needed, but not common law marriages, which have been around for thousands of years, folks. In fact, many denominations, being 501c corporate churches, have to operate with them today, since they are licensed preachers under public policy giving glory to the state. But marriage licenses are certainly not God's glory, nor the terms and conditions set forth in the laws of nature, nor in Scripture. Since the American Revolutionary War and up to the early 1900s, there were two requirements to marry. First, you had to receive your parents' permission, and secondarily, you had to post public notice of the ceremony up to 15 days before the ceremony. That publishing of the band requirement, or posting notice, apparently dates back to Europe to the year 1215, and as used with both the Church of England, which was part of the Roman Catholic Church at that time, and Roman Catholicism, it served as a formal writ of authority issued by the churches. It was also used alternately or in conjunction with the marriage license, and if used alone, it was due to cost, as I pointed earlier. But indeed, the State Library of Virginia has documents that describe banns as a widely disseminated public notice in this sense, and has been used widely up until recently in America in conjunction with marriage licenses. At this time, the Roman Catholic Church decreed that husband and wife had to publicly post bans or notices of a wedding ceremony to decrease invalid betrothal marriages. This was done to prevent any deception on the part of one or both parties before the public ceremony. But where in the Bible is a public ceremony commanded? That is adding to the Scriptures. Also, that requirement is legalism simply because by this time they are already married through their parents' permission. When they post the bans, they're in marriage. And the state is failing to recognize this biblical marriage and law of nature fact by requiring this public notice, no matter how many Lutheran churches practiced it. Remember, the clergy did not even begin to formalize a marriage until the mid-1500s. But no matter how or by whom the ban was used, God despises publishing the ban. Christians do not publish false doctrine. Remember, publishing the ban deals not with a couple intending to marry, according to the government, but with a husband and wife who are already betrothed and therefore married. I mean, when you go to courts to ask for permission, they're married. You know, I mean, the parents already given them permission. Everything's done, is finalized. All that publishing the ban does is seek out publicly via the newspaper reasons why you should now divorce your spouse, since they are in fact married through betrothal. Imagine that. Sometimes gossip is better left uncovered, isn't it? If publishing the ban is so good, then why not more? Why not publicly require the seeking out reasons to divorce your spouse every year by putting each current marriage in the newspaper? Or did you see them look at this? Or better yet, every month publish every married couple's picture with the words, "Have you seen this person commit adultery today?" Why doesn't the government require this? Following their logic, if some is good, then more must be better, right? In other words, God already has a built-in protection measure he has determined is sufficient. What is this built-in protection measure? It is this: clandestine engagements, when young and done without parental approval while living at home, are not properly engagements, and you're not actually engaged or married. Other engagements, which where for some reason or other the consent of either individual is lacking, are not properly engagements or marriage. In other words, if the respective parents are living for both sides, their consent should normally be obtained. And as parents may not force on their children a marriage against their will, so children should not marry anyone against the will of their parents. The state should never be involved in who our child may marry, not at what age, for the laws of nature have assigned this law of nature right to parents, not the state. But the state considers the law of nature rights to be evolving, just like with the head covering crowd that deny the head coverings, and of no importance, as many today do not consider the need for women to wear head coverings. The Lutheran confessions declare that it is lawful for the Christian to contract marriage, meaning no government permission is needed. And to emphasize that, the Apology of the Lutheran Confessions says, "This divine ordinance in man is a natural right. The union of man is by natural right, since natural rights are unchangeable," and that is not believed today by the Lutheran churches nor by the government. They believe that the law of nature rights are well, whoever's got the power determines them, right? The right to contract marriage must always remain, the Lutheran confessions. Where nature does not change, there must remain that ordinance which God has built into nature, and human regulations cannot abolish it. It continues natural law. Natural right is really divine right, because it is an ordinance divinely stamped on nature. Since only in God he created everything, right? In the Lutheran confessions go on, since only an extraordinary act of God can change this right, like he did in the crossing of the Red Sea and so on, or as he does with women having to wear head coverings in church today. Not a woman has the right. It's her glory not to wear them, but God overcomes that. And so it's an extraordinary act. Only God can change these law of nature rights. The right to contract marriage necessarily remains. Okay, it doesn't mean contract through government, some kind of contract. It means the right to marry is what it means. And so that's a bad word that the Lutheran confessions put. I mean, it's just compare what's going on today. But you get the sense. For the natural desire of one sex for the other is an ordinance of God, and therefore it is a right. Otherwise, why would both sexes have been created? Natural love, which lust did not remove from nature but only inflamed. Now it needs a remedy even more, and marriage is necessary for remedy as well as for procreation. Human authority, the Lutheran confessions say, that means government, regulations, cannot abolish either nature or lust. They cannot abolish the statement, "It is better to marry than to be aflame with passion." It is up to each man's conscience to decide this matter, and the Lutheran confessions do support the parents on this. And God wants us to use the universal laws of nature which he has instituted. But according to Black's Law Dictionary, which is telling you what's going on today, a marriage license is a license or permission granted by public authority to persons who intend to intermarry. Okay, they're already married. Intermarry is defined as misconnection, mixed or interracial marriages. Thus, these contractual licenses started quietly in America only after a black person began to live with a white individual. Imagine our government doing that today, where they push those marriages as being normal today. But they knew in advance where they were going with these mixed racial marriage licenses. And as the governments of this world always planned generations ahead, getting a society used to hearing about them. And so then they became commonplace for all races. And by legal definition, a license is necessary to do that which without the license is illegal or licentious. It was done under slavery when they first started these laws against the whites not being able to marry blacks. So why continue the slavery today with marriage licenses, with all their socialist programs attached to them? This is called packing. Packing is when government offers licenses, driver's license, they pack. We're starting to pack with all kinds of things, telling you can't do without them. You can't travel overseas. There's all kinds of reasons they come up. Forcing the citizens to go along with socialism to keep their head above the water, because the government is stealing our money with thousands of government redistribution of wealth programs. Where now today 60% of the American people are living paycheck to paycheck, unable to practically help their neighbor. And when you are unable to help your neighbor willingly, God will not give you back as a citizen at least what you have willingly given others. And is why a nation like America today is caught in the corporate web of socialism, where this nation is turning to more and more violence. Homelessness is getting to be everywhere, where only the rich will succeed. And that was all designed, all their programs designed to get rid of that, right? Such a contract with the state is said to be a specific performance contract as to the privileges, duties, and responsibilities that attach. Consideration on the part of the husband and wife is the actual fee paid in when you go to the justice of peace or whatever, and the implied agreement to be subject to the state statutes, rules, and regulations related to what they term as marriage law, family law, children, and property. This consideration paid by the bride and groom places them in an inferior position in regard to the state's position of whatever type of union you want to call it, because it isn't marriage. Now, even your children born to you are considered by law as a contract-bearing fruit, meaning the children are owned by the state under this contract you signed. And this is reinforced by you signing birth certificates and possibly other contractual agreements you signed, for example, your Social Security card. If a woman doesn't sign a birth certificate, the woman, she's thrown in jail today. And so, I'm not sitting here telling you, okay, go out and get rid of your marriage licenses, or I'm looking online and people are just using it for estate planning purposes today. But you got all these anti-Christian things filled with it. It's just crazy. You got these certain religions today in America that believe in socialism, they believe in marriage licenses, and they're in powerful positions. And then you got all the liberals on top of the church denominations. The government could care less whether you know about these undisclosed contracts when you're signing a birth certificate, for example. Remember this. Contract law requires that the parties agree on the terms, and thus undisclosed terms should not be able to be enforced, but they are. Yet they tell us a marriage license is just for administrative purposes. That piece of paper legitimately or illegitimately defines when marriage happens incorrectly, and that's enough for a Christian. In addition, merely by registering your vehicle with the government, they also take possession or ownership. Yet this is not disclosed. Is this reality? Yes. The title for your vehicle leads you to believe you actually own it. No. Do you? No. You find this out when they confiscate your vehicle for some crime. It's returned to mommy and daddy. The land you think you own is not really yours at all either. You got property taxes. You don't do that when you buy a coat, You don't pay taxes on it every year. This too is owned by the government today. This too can be confiscated, returned to mom and dad for government private corporations to make money off of too. It's vitally important for parents to understand that when you sign a government-issued business enterprise license or the birth certificate or both, the state becomes a parent of the country. Or to state it more bluntly, the state is the undisclosed true parent. Secondarily, the marriage license is a business license allowing the the husband and wife in the name of whatever you want to call it, to enter into contracts with third parties, the corporations, which they also are in control of, and contract mortgages and debts under corporations, under the head of the state. Everything's under the head of the state, folks. But why was this not the situation in the 18th, 19th centuries, if it was all over the place, as they claim, or if it was so needed as a state? Something must have changed. Could it be that corporations have taken over our society themselves under privileged corporate government control and authority? And there is a seemingly unsolvable web of problems thrusting Christians into sin today, and so many. And so today a family cannot get the state out of our life. As everywhere you turn, they got you here, got you there, even by forcing the mother to sign a birth certificate upon delivery of her child, or accepting anything from the government, as, for example, some people say, even sending your child to the public school system. The government sets basically creates and sets these pedantic, childish, really, non-negotiable terms and conditions, and the consumer basically has to swallow the pills or join the homeless with the deadbeat dads. And so, therefore, today, doing business is not only a societal enterprise, but is considered a privileged business enterprise agreement, as well as for a for-profit business enterprise by the state. But then you are caught in the negative aspects, the ever-changing public policy requirements, that of obeying the state and not Christ. Just follow the money. Divorce alone is a $50 billion a year corporate industry, whereas guns are merely about a $25 billion a year corporate industry. A newer version of Black's Law Dictionary states a marriage license is a document issued by a public authority that grants a couple permission to marry. But it really is not a natural marriage, but an artificial union. And it's just how you define terms, and so to Christians, it's not a marriage. And what is permission? According to the 8th edition of Black's Law Dictionary, permission includes the concept of a license. No one should need the state's permission to marry, nor should it be offered by the state. Why? Because you're already married through betrothal. And so when you go to them for any questions, how old are they, and so on and so forth, they're already married. That's why you're going there. And so, and if these rebels are so concerned about the stability of the nuclear family, then why do they not outlaw gambling, pornography, and the redistribution of wealth, backroom schemes, other vices that actually do erode the nuclear family? In fact, the nuclear family is done away with once father and mother sign a marriage license, according to Christianity and the Bible, in the examples. The children born are now property of the state. Marriage licenses and many of the other things we sign make you wards of the state. Slaves, all of them violate the 7th commandment, thou shalt not steal, and the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet anything that is thy neighbor's. They started coveting this back in the 18th century, early on. They saw the income tax and putting all these together in the same day, and it happened. But even if we could localize the problem as just being that of a marriage license, what marriage is left since the couple is already married through betrothal in the eyes of God? What happens is that the state enters as a member of your union through this contractual license, and now you are really not married as naturally defined by the laws of nature, but the state slyly makes you pay for that license, consideration, whatever it is, $5, $10, to cement the deal. Another rule they dream up on their beds. It's childish things that they, for example, even a driver's license. You can't put. You have to put it in. The state has to put it in capital letters, folks. These poor people, don't have driver's license. Then, boy, 5 police cars are around them with guns and pull them out. Whereas if you're an illegal driving, thousands of them drive every day, and they pull them over, let them go. Why let them go? Because they can't make any money off them in the prison system. Where they can citizens, And so insurance industry, you just eventually have to let them go. It's discrimination is really what it is. And Congress knows about it. But, if somebody has some break money, they can bust through this, I think, and start getting Americans free in that sense. And Mexicans have proven, the illegals, by driving, some of them can't even read signs, and they don't have any higher accident rates than Americans. I'm going to discuss all this on marriage licenses. I'm not going to do it right now. But God does not approve of the state entering a union as a third party, for it is worse than polygamy. For the state enters as a third party in the form of a non-living corporation. But in a marriage there are two living parties, the husband and the wife. Paul defines this in 1 Timothy chapter 3 when he says, 1, notice a husband is not competing with any government. 1, that ruleth well his, not the state's, own house, having his, not the state's, children in subjection with all gravity. Stop marriage license. Stop unnatural unions. God even wanted polygamy done away with. This is worse than polygamy. It's not even dealing with another living person. Done away with in the New Testament, besides whatever type of union one may call this today. Every time Paul refers to husbands and wives in the New Testament, it's always woman in the singular and man in the singular. Thus Christ nor a husband should have to compete with any government, state government, over terms and conditions as the law of Hammurabi did. And now state corporations become the head of your family and the primary authority in this unnatural union, but the real terms and conditions are set forth by God only in His Word. As Ephesians 5 reads, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother," not the state, okay? He doesn't get permission from the state. "And shall be joined unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh." Notice no third party entering your marriage. Yet this is what happens when you procure a business enterprise agreement, as these are. And this destruction of property rights by the state disagrees with the Lutheran confessions, which declare it is right for Christians to hold property, to have children, meaning own property. And further, the confessions declare the gospel does not destroy the family, and marriage licenses do. Indeed, ownership of property is the very basis of the gospel. Christ gave His life freely, not under force. He could have had 1,000 angels, he said, in a second. David coveted that which was his own. Another man's wife, Bathsheba, showed himself as he truly was, a murderer. Robbers and thieves are murderers. Thieves and murderers are synonymous in the Bible, and this is the danger of government turning itself from becoming what it was, protectors of property rights, and early on in our nation's history, to being thieves, socialist thieves. For they are showing themselves as very capable of murder, as we see allowing contraceptive use, which kills human life and eternal life too. And where are they going? In baby murdering clinics also. Please never give up your Second Amendment rights, folks. Matthew chapter 5 teaches us that God hates divorce, as Matthew 19 expounds. If God hates divorce, then there can be no uncertainty about when the essence of marriage begins. Don't you think? Otherwise, God would no longer be able to say He hates divorce, since we don't know for certain if the couple is actually married and here, there, or whenever. And in fact, they tell us that a baby isn't a baby until it's on its own. Well, what year does that mean? Like 20 years old? And they believe him. And if you do not know when a couple is for certain married, then how can one be accused of putting away your wife improperly, as Matthew chapter 19 discusses? And then the whole warning of Jesus not to marry someone who improperly in divorce makes no sense either. Now, if God hates divorce, would not God define for us when marriage happens and when it ends? Marriage happens in betrothal, folks, not with a government license. It's one of the most documented doctrines in Scripture that it begins in. I can't think of anything that has so many Bible verses attached to it. I'm just going to go through some. It's all over the place. Therefore, the liberal theologians, to counteract this, have actually come to believe that God no longer hates divorce, as Matthew 19 declares, and it is certainly true today. Notice divorce was common in the Old Testament due to polygamous practices, which confuses divorce and remarriage matters. But yet God wants to return to moral law principles. But I say to you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication. Jesus desires to return to the one man, one woman through the apostles' inspired text here in Ephesians 5. The same with two in Matthew 19, when Jesus says, "For this cause shall a man and father leave, and shall cleave to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh." Therefore, it's impossible that when marriage happens is uncertain or not definable. It's the old trick of the serpent being expressed with from the deceptive lips of the modern theologians to tell us we just do not know when marriage begins. As the serpent tells Eve in Genesis chapter 3, hath God said. I'm going to deal with this in the next video a lot more and look at it. But when a biblical doctrine is broken, then more doctrines are broken, because Scripture is a mathematical point that when you err in one doctrine, all doctrines eventually fall, and a society falls apart gradually in chaos and theft, as we see happening right before our very eyes. Leviticus chapter 18 forbade a man to take a wife to her sister to vex her. Rivalry and distress are often characteristics of polygamy marriages, which is why Christ did not want this to continue. Thus, the attention to detail is demanded in Exodus chapter 21. In Deuteronomy chapter 21 shows the problems of having more wives than one. That is endless strife and jealousies, which creates uneasiness and problems for the husband. The law of Moses did not permit polygamy, but God only allowed it, as Christ says, because of the hardness of their hearts. And that's turned around if you do studies on the internet. That's the reason. And having more than one wife turned the heart of Solomon from wholly following God, as 1 Kings 11 shows. Christ now wants the marriage, or marriages, to resemble that of the church, as John chapter 10 states, to be one fold, one shepherd. Or in a family marriage, to be one husband, one wife, both entering marriage as virgins and as believers. For the church and family are, as Ephesians 5 points out, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. Christ does not want a concubine of half wives who have not true faith and may draw them away from his fold, which Paul addresses in 1 Corinthians and Galatians. Marriage normally culminates in a sexual coming together in order to bear children and be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and tame our passions. And this is part of what the one flesh means in Ephesians 5. Concerning Ephesians chapter 5, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. The usages of this one flesh speak about a marriage union. And outside of 1 Corinthians 6 verse 16, as will be explained later, the whole context of Ephesians 5 through Ephesians chapter 6 depict married life. And when Paul mentions the two shall be one flesh, he is implicitly condemning polygamy. Otherwise, he would have stated the two or three shall be one flesh. And this is worse in polygamy, when a government enters it as a corporation, a non-living thing. Yet the two shall be one flesh depicts marriage in its entirety, including a possible sacramental dimension, as both are partakers of the Lord's Supper. Thus, when Paul mentions one flesh in Ephesians 5, he is including the sacramental dimension, also outlining the whole array of the promise of the husband given in marriage to love and protect, provide, and the request to her to be his wife in submission, and then her acceptance of this promise in lieu of parental approval, right on till death do us part. In fact, the one flesh concept goes to son and daughter and even extended family relationships, as you can see in those verses, which is why divorce affects so many people. Paul is dealing specifically with a Christian marriage in these verses in Ephesians, and he says so in Ephesians 5, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, baptism, and the Lord's Supper in Ephesians 5, for we are members of his body and of his flesh and of his bones. And so the sacramental thing. Yet infants and unmarried believers are included in this great mystery of Ephesians 5. And so thus the one flesh concept is inclusive of all believers. It's not merely limited to a marriage matter, as some make marriage to be a sacrament. It's how you define a sacrament. But this is proven in that great mystery is concerning Christ and the church. Church here is inclusive of all believers in Ephesians, infants included. In other words, the emphasis in Ephesians 5 centers on a faith relationship and the real presence of Christ amongst all believers because of the Lord's Supper, but it's certainly not meant to define when marriage begins, the one flesh. That's what I'm getting at. This is how marriage, a Christian marriage though, could possibly be considered a sacrament, it's dealing with the Lord's Supper. As Christ nourishes a marriage through the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, so too Christian fathers nourish and provide for the wives, and the wife serves and obeys the husband. And marriage can also possibly strengthen faith because of tribulations. In this sense, may be considered a sacrament if you're kind of comparing the baptism, Lord's Supper. But Christians do not believe marriage creates faith, nor confers the forgiveness of sins as with baptism and the Lord's Supper. And notice in Genesis chapter 2, no sexual intercourse per se is mentioned, but the whole array of leadership for man, naming the beasts and giving Eve her name. And then the wills of both of them agreeing to be a working unit in harmony in marriage. The man loving his wife in various ways, regardless of whether they are believers or unbelievers. This is what the whole context defines as one flesh. It is a broad term that encompasses the whole marriage time, possibly family relationships if they're all Christian, and is not merely time-specific, nor limited to a Christian marriage in Genesis chapter 2. And it does deal with family relationships, even in an unchristian, relationship. It hurts everybody. And so for a non-Christian couple, it means a commitment along normally with sexual relations, but for a Christian, it entails the former plus the sacramental presence of Christ among and in all believers. And marriage can also possibly strengthen saving faith because of tribulations. I just went over that, I'm sorry. But yet the time of when marriage occurs is not defined as the sexual intercourse time in Ephesians chapter 5 through one flesh. This is because some married couples are unable to have sex. When marriage happens is defined elsewhere. But our opposition asks us to prove it, that marriage starts with betrothal. Well, it's all over scriptures, folks. And I'm just going to mention some here. The greedy liberals do not believe the Bible when it says, give unto God the things that are God's. For marriage is a thing of God. God works through the laws of nature to bring couples together, and even is a sacrament for Christians, depending on how one defines it. But notice the biblical pronouncements, which refer to the betrothed or espoused or engaged, however you want to say it, virgins. That's how people should marry, as virgins, Christians, as the wives or spouse of their husbands. And these engaged persons are the in-laws of the fiance's parents before any wedding and consummated marriage, as pointed out in those verses. Notice the regulations concerning betrothal. Notice betrothed and wife in verses 23 to 24. Notice too, sexual immorality with an engaged woman is punished the same as adultery committed with a neighbor's wife. And so on. Observe the terms of the antitype of Christ and his church. The church is a chaste virgin espoused to Christ, is indeed his bride, and he her husband. 2 Corinthians and Revelation. Thus the breach of betrothal, see the same usages of put away in Matthew and so on, is tantamount to divorce, which means betrothal is still the essence of marriage in the New Testament too. And so our government today, they are religiously involved in American violation of the First Amendment. Just follow the corporate money. Many circuit courts today ban unnatural incestuous relationships, stating something like a woman should not marry her father, brother, grandmother, grandfather, son, grandson, and stepfather, and so on and so forth. Or another woman, homosexuality, and vice versa for the man. To get their foot in the door, the legal system had to put these statutes out to fool the public. These are things the courts were supposed to have protected Americans from, were sold to the public from the get-go to protect us from a natural relation. So that's the reason they put these in there. Because common law handles all that. It did back in the 1800s. It's against the law of nature. It violates the preamble to the Constitution. In which obviously tells you how to interpret the Constitution. It's unnatural. Okay, it's against the law of nature, and so these, you don't have to put these in as statutes before. And John the Baptist showed it when he went after Herod for something they were already in. So and so in common law courts they can handle these incestuous relationships basically as well as statutory laws can. In most nations, about 102 could basically care less what age a male or female in marriage. Did you know that? As this is not the responsibility of the state. Ancient Rome required 12 years age for a female, 14 for a male. And in the early 1000s, American women did marry at those ages, and there were no requirements. They often married at that. And their divorce rate was much less. That's the whole thing. America's got one of the highest divorce rates, and you look at these other countries that don't have any regulations on it, and they're much more stable as a family unit. A statistic our opposition time after time refuses to comment on. They don't even want to discuss this, and instead concentrate on having our children socialized. I was reading this article just recently online. It talked about all that, and it said, we're going to give you reasons. We're going to give you reasons why they shouldn't marry. And they kept on saying that, and they never said anything. All they said came about was socialization, going to the public schools. It's just like here, if you're homeschooled. Are your kids socialized? Okay. And so possibly what happens in public school systems, and studies have shown, folks, that they're no better socialized than public school systems. In fact, if there's any difference, it's homeschoolers are better socialized. And what happens? It possibly raped by the gym teacher or in the school bus, shot in the classroom, or beat up in the hallway, or given condoms in sex education courses, which they shouldn't be doing. Even teaching sex education. Sure, there is a slightly higher death rate and I'm going to deal with public school systems, and that's socialism too. And nobody should be required to give anybody money for their teaching. I mean, everything can be, today you can do everything online. And sure, there is a slightly higher death rate. In fact, you can teach your kids probably online in 2 hours at night when you get home after work better than they could in a whole day at school. Sure, there's a slightly higher death rate when women conceive at 12 years of age rather than maybe 16, but if it's one of saving lives, and that's what they might say, is why not ban women older than 35 years from being able to bear children too? Or since maybe women are best apt to give birth at age, let's say 20 or 22, then why not ban every other woman from having children if it's all about saving lives? Or if burying children at a young age is primarily an economic education problem, as they say, then why is it that 60% of the American people are living paycheck to paycheck in America? And almost 40% are never able to retire. The generation that was educated and socialized through the public schools, the best. No. It's not. It's all about preventing Christians from bearing children in America, and more workers for the income tax payrolls, and having cheap labor for corporate American. And who wants to compete against young kids anyway, right? And if they're out working, I mean, oh boy, I mean they're young, they're strong, and one less human footprint, right, for the overpopulation fanatics. And it's against the laws of nature to have any licensed individual help give a woman birth. It's work is not a privilege, it's a right. And I talk about this in the next one coming up. But more so having to go to a hospital and walk out with a $25,000 bill, along with being forced to sign a birth certificate and a requirement to put your newborn in a baby seat or face child protective services right from the beginning. And these pedantic rules are saving lives to them, while they turn their heads on what pornography, free sex, homosexual, and contraceptive. You can't even compare the two in these sexual things that are going on with any kind of saving laws, from seatbelt laws to whatever kind of statutes they got today. In 1 year, what happens here, in all the gun shootings, combined for the next 50 years, you could take all the things they can think of, and they far surpass it with porn, what's going on, raping women, free sex, all the sexual diseases, cancers coming, contraceptive use, killing human life, and babies eternally. In contraceptive, I mean, one day on that, contraceptive use probably goes way beyond anything that they could dream up as saving lives. Only 1% of women giving birth in the early 1900s, died. And this without any licensed medical staff or even hospitals around, as unlicensed midwives did an admirable job at that time. My grandmother was a midwife. Uh, and so, anyway, now the medical license established performs way too many C-sections, endangering the lives of women on a regular basis and making them unable to give birth in the future. It's a positive for the overpopulation fanatics. And who's serving you at the hospital? They're liberal, nuts, a lot of them. I mean, as far as, I mean, I've even heard of one person saying they gave a C-section to her, and the doctor, and she even heard the doctor say he needed to get out and play golf that afternoon. You know, and who's going to take care of them in the future at retirement age without many children today? And are there even going to be very many retirement? I mean, who wants to put their dad in a retirement home today with what happened to COVID? Liberalism always denies the laws of nature and property rights in countless ways in America, which is why marriage licenses have come into existence. And since marriage licenses are unnatural, how can anyone believe in them? I mean, marriage is a right. And God never even put any godly restrictions on the age of marriage. You know that? Leaving that to parental wisdom. They're given in marriage, right? By the husband, not by the government. Not government statutes, but he did not. But God did He did put God-breathed statutes on unnatural incest, like in Abraham marrying his sister in Genesis chapter 20, or Moses' aunt and nephew were his parents. It's right there. Or Jacob Esau marrying his first cousins. God eventually closed marriages between close relatives in Leviticus, and that's just based on common law. That's common law is based upon the laws of nature. That's why you don't need statutes on it. That's the only law mentioned in the Constitution is common law. And so, for this reason, and why John the Baptist reproves Herod after the fact, as common law functions in other natural ways, like in Job chapter 31, which states, "If mine heart have been deceived by the woman, or if I have laid waste at my neighbor's door, for this a heinous crime, yet it is an iniquity to be punished by the judges." In these situations, action should be taken by the authorities, for all these relationships violate the laws of nature and very dangerous, sexuous and so dangerous in killing people. Or common law, way beyond gun deaths. I mean, there's just that, you could have a war going out there today in America and be nothing compared to what's going on sexually. The government here should step in with witnesses in a court setting, but never creating statutory marriage licenses, giving government headship over your marriage, and worse, socialist programs of theft. This is how sex and marriages should be regulated by the state, for marriage is not a status founded on contract, for that's not even a marriage. I mean, if they want to call it a marriage legally, it's not a marriage as far as the laws of nature and common law and Christians consider, but it's a business contract. But our government puts unnatural restrictions on how old your child can marry. Your child. Yet God does give parents the approximate age, not the state, when a girl is old enough to marry. As the Song of Solomon declares, "We have a little sister, and she hath no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she be spoken for?" In other words, when she has breast developed. For here we have the Christian standard based upon the laws of nature, that a female is too young when she has no breasts. The age can vary, and thus it is up to the discretion of the parents, not the state, as most nations today understand it. This is because breastfeeding is important, but was largely denied for years by the medical establishment in America, in many ways. In many instances I saw online where, you can still take this product, it works just fine. And no, we're seeing now, there are other factors that only a parent should concern themselves with, and not the jurisdiction of a government to make a young lady undress to find out, nor the courts, and which is why forced checkups should not be demanded by a government. They are not their children. And for one thing, they are out looking for incest instead of doing what they should: ban pornography, homosexual, and free sex. Let's get at it the right way. Don't go around looking for trouble. yeah, in violating the parental rights, in the rights of the child who's under the parent. Incest was never an issue back in the early 1900s, uh, when pornography was not allowed. Now over 90% of college students partake of pornography regularly, and then we wonder why there are so many rapes or women being abused, in spite of all the so-called protection of equal rights. And we do see a lot in Scripture about remaining virgin until you are married, and praising and lauding this fact. But is something our government religiously involved discourages through sex education courses with unnatural sex outside of marriage. Unnatural relationships should be banned by a moral government since they violate the laws of nature as seen with the spread of sexual diseases outside of marriage. In this sense, homosexuality must have reasonable controls since it is both an unnatural joining of bodies and is also an unnatural sexual relationship in dealing with just one sex, not the two. How a nation can call that business enterprise and contract a marriage in any way is an outright law, as the preamble of the Constitution states that the laws of nature and nature's God. Thus, the natural joining of bodies and or in a natural relationship never be under the jurisdiction of a worldly government, for what worldly government can correct God, where the parents have the only and final say? And as Isaiah chapter 40 states, who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being his counselor hath taught him? With whom took he counsel, and who instructed him, and taught him in the path of judgment, and taught him knowledge, and shewed to him the way of understanding? Congress believes maybe they can. Is there any nation which has gone so far as America and other contractual agreements and slyly taking away the property rights of their own citizens in every imaginable way? You look at even the marriage licenses of these other states. I mean, what we've done here in America is just pack it. For a better understanding of how our government and Congress slyly brought about or in the acceptance of marriage licenses, see on YouTube The Ugly Truth of Marriage Licenses. At first, our government, at a time when the scrutiny of their actions were largely hidden, banned black and white marriages in the middle of the war, as it said. This lets one know that the main purpose of the war was not primarily to end slavery, was it? I mean, to pass this when you're fighting, and they're supposedly fighting against slavery. It just, as the history books teach us today, for how could Congress pass such anti-miscegenation laws if the war was primarily about ending slavery? That makes no sense. In fact, California had these laws until 1948, as mentioned, and started out in 1924, and they kept them until 1967. Or how could the various states allow the brutal Jim Crow laws to be enacted starting almost a day after the war ended in 1866 by the northern states, basically as much as the southern, if ending slavery was the main reason for the war, as taught by the victors' history books today? I ask this because the public still believes the war was about ending slavery. But the politicians knew, and they know different, as we find out about their whole purpose going along in the 1800s, is get that income tax, get those marriages, and get those corporations. For additionally, by 1913, all races would enter government-run slavery. Through the Federal Reserve. I mean, paper money. It changed the courts. Brought in these laws. The main purpose of all wars, as even our involvement in the Ukrainian war right now, is not about saving the savage attack on Ukrainian people. That's what the media tells us, and they show us all these, and it's terrible what's happening, but saving the dollar versus the yuan, as even the media is often alluded to on TV. Worldly governments are only interested in power, money, and control of other nations once they get their own under control. But to get that, they need to have authority over their own citizens, first. You see how communists think years in advance. For after the war, when the anti-miscegenation laws, marriage laws, were already in place by Congress during the war, then a few years later, Congress came to the rescue, appearing as a savior, slyly bringing back freedom, right? But only through a government slave license, through the writing of the sly 14th Amendment. Here now citizens were not merely citizens of each state, but now citizens of the ever-growing powerful federal government, citizens of the United States, the 14th Amendment reads. This allowed the federal government, after the needed introduction of paper money in 1913, that was basic, got to have that, to pass in 1923 the Uniform Marriage and Marriage License Act, and then in 1929 marriage license laws were operative in all states except Maryland in 1935, and California apparently kept these laws until 1948, and Maryland until 1967. But in history, I'm pointing out so you're not misled by what you're reading. It takes governments years to take away freedom, but Congress carefully planned each step years in advance beneath the radar of the American people. For thousands of years, there were little to no license requirements in whatever and however often they were utilized at the time of the law. Hammurabi is a matter of dispute, and it was just for a brief period of time, about 100 years in the New Testament history, in a localized area, not worldwide. In other words, marriage licenses, practically speaking, were non-existent until 1929. And so this nation must take government out of these worse and wicked business enterprise unions and also force divorce courts, for divorce itself is a huge $50 billion a year industry benefiting private corporations and government. Even the law of Hammurabi never abuse their citizens in comparison to how the government bullies their citizens in America today. That's enough for now. Have a great day. Part 2 coming up.